Good morning for our North American participants and good afternoon or evening to our listeners from Europe. My name is Oleksii Chebotarov. It's great pleasure for me to chair today's session on multi-ethnic encounters with and indigenous knowledge on environment in Ukraine. As part of the series Rethinking Ukraine Environment, War, Ecocide and Beyond, this seminar series is co-organized and co-hosted by Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies and Environmental History of Ukraine Research Group. I'll start briefly framing today's discussion by situating it within several broader theoretical conversations. At its core, this seminar invites us to move beyond thinking of Ukraine as the bounded national space and instead approaching it as a historical layered multi-ethnic environmental field shaped by imperial formations, mobility, and uneven power relations. This aligns with a broader critique of methodological nationalism and with environmental histories shift from the shift towards transregional and relational perspective. At the same time, this discussion can be understood as a part of a larger intellectual project of provincializing Europe in the sense proposed by Dipesh Chakrabarty. This is rather than rethinking Eastern Europe and Ukraine in particular as peripheral or as peripheral, we approach it as the space that generates its own configurations of environmental knowledge, historical experience, and human nature relations. In this sense, Ukraine became not an object of theory, but a site from which theory can be produced. My second point is about multi-ethnicity and as an environmental condition. Rather than treating diversity as background context, we might see it as something that actively structures how environment and are understood and used. And here, Richard White's notion of middle ground is useful, highlighting how shared spaces become sites of negotiations, transition, and hybrid practices. This raises a central question for today's discussion: what happens when multiple ecological knowledge systems coexist with the same landscapes? This leads us directly to the question of indigenous and local knowledge. Drawing from the work of Victor Perkes, we can think of such knowledge as cumulative, place-based, and embodied in long-term relationship with the environment. At the same time, many scholars encounter us to think in the terms of an ecology of knowledge, where multiple epistemologies coexist without being hierarchically ordered. Applying this perspective to Ukraine, of course, requires some conceptual care. While Ukraine is not typically framed within a settler colonial paradigm, its history within the Russian Empire and Soviet Union involved processes of territorial control and epistemic standardization that often marginalized local knowledge system, including one on environment. At the same time, certain communities, such as Crimean Tatars, can be approached through indigenous framework, particularly in relation to displacement, environmental knowledge, and claims to land. More broadly, this also opens space to think about vernacular ecological knowledge across borderland communities. Finally, the notion of multi-ethnic encounters suggests that environment themselves function as a contact zone, to borrow from Mary Louise Pratt, where different communities meet, interact, and negotiate meanings of nature. From this perspective, landscapes are not passive background, but relational fields shaped by interaction, conflict, and coexisting over time. Taken together, these perspectives invite us to see Ukraine not as peripheral, but as a productive site for rethinking core questions in environmental history and environmental humanities, particularly around knowledge, power, and human environmental relations. With that, I would like to invite our speakers to reflect on how multi-ethnic encounters and diverse knowledge systems shape environmental practices in Ukraine, and how these perspectives might help us to rethink the field more broadly. Our first speaker today is Nara Narimanova. Nara is a PhD student in Indigenous Crimean Tatar Studies at the Faculty of Native Studies and research assistant at QUs at the Alberta University. Previously, Nara, as a Fulbright scholar, did her MA in public publicity and administration at the University of Massachusetts. Her research focused on experiences of Crimean Tatars, particularly in the topography of Crimea and the preservation of oral stories. Moreover, Nara has big experience in planning, coordinating, and managing programs that support civil society organizations and local governments in Ukraine. She is an advocate for participation of indigenous people in decision-making processes and is an interpreter of 5 languages. Moreover, she is an expert on cross-cultural communication, including regions across North America, Ukraine, and Turkey. So, Nara, the floor is yours.
Great. Hi, good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Менің атым Нара Нариманова. Мен Қырым татар тамыр халықлардан, Қырымдан келдім. Шынды Канадада яшаймын. I said, good morning, hello. My name is Nara Narimanova, and I am Crimean Tatar, indigenous person from Crimea, residing in Canada. Crimean Tatars, as you might know, are indigenous people of Ukraine, Crimea, and they share very deep bond with the Crimean lands. It's for us, it's not just the land, it's how we live there, how we reside, and how we treat our land. And obviously, we've been there for generations, and so our indigenous knowledge is practical, centuries oriented, and dialogue is a dialogue with unique landscape. And we will just talk about how indigenous knowledge created a living map between indigenous people and other people in Crimea. Through toponymy, the naming places, and what happens when those names are erased. So we have 3 ecological zones in Crimea, which is steppe. It's in the north, in the east of Crimea. And we call it in Crimean Tatar Chol. We have mountains, Daglar. We have south coast, which is Yalaboyu. And obviously we have 3 sub-ethnical groups of Crimean Tatars, also called Chol people, or Nohailar. And we have Tats, and we have Yellow Boilo. And obviously, all of these sub-ethnic groups, they have, and we have our way of living in different climate zones of Crimea, because steppe could be seen as harsh, windy, especially when we talk about winter. And mountains, it's also depending on what zone or what season we are in. You can take the herd there and in the summer. And South Coast, it's Yellow Boy people where it's all about fishing and how they treat their land there with their own individual knowledge. And each requiring a unique knowledge for survival. So we have a big issue as scaredness of water, which is called SU, and water scarcity and unique topography. Crimean Tatars were historically well known as masters of irrigation and water management. So we would find places in the mountains, in the forest, or in the steppes regions, how to treat water, how to make channels to create fountains or cheshmes. So irrigation system, as I mentioned, are canals, fountains, cheshme. So it's we also have agricultural and steppe wisdom. Obviously, it's not only steppe wisdom. We have wisdom in mountains and in coastal part of Crimea. Crimean Tatars cultivate or used to cultivate before the deportation 48 varieties of apples, specialized tobacco and vineyards in places others found inhospitable. In the north, as I mentioned, Nohais were uniquely skilled at coaxing water out of steppe and navigating open plains to find seasonal pastures. Architecture adapted homes, for example, in the more of mountainous regions or coastal places were built directly into cliffs using the rock as a fourth wall and which served as a roof, providing social squares. As you can see on this picture, it's Orkhapa. It's on the north of Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula. Kharem, the word Kharem is Crimea. So it's coming, it serves as the protection or the fortress of Crimea. So during Crimean Hanat, they built this fortress along the Crimean Strip, which connects Crimea to mainland of Ukraine. So as I mentioned, we have a visual guide, which is Chatardakh, could be translated as Tent Mountain. It's one of the well-known mountains in Crimea. Akkaya, it's a white cliff of Karasu Bazar or Belogorsk. Also well-known cliff with its limestone rock and Taraktash or Kombrook of Sudak Valley. And we have Bakhchisarai, which is translates as a place of gardens. Also, there is a big language of water, as Crimean Tatars were the masters of irrigational system of water, we have different descriptions of any kind of water. So, for example, subuxu, it's a water which usually comes from the underground, and it translates as cold water. Cheshmeh is a fountain, could be directed from the mountains or also from the underground canals. Karasu is the black water, is the water which comes from beneath the earth. And Karasu River, Black Water River, and Aksu is a white water. So it's an interesting fact that I would like to share with you about the story of my grandmother. She grew up in Karasu Bazar, which is now known as Belogorsk. So why is it? I was wondering why Karasu Bazar is called Karasu Bazar now. So Kara it means black. As you can see on the screen, Karasu is black water, and so Karasu is black water. Bazar is a bazaar or a place where people come to the market and buy stuff. And so, as it turned out, the city is located on the big river, which is called Büyük Karasu River. That's why it has its own the naming process, how Crimean Tatars started calling Karasu, because the city is situated exactly on the Black River. So relational naming, villages were often named after kabile or clans who stewarded the land. And UNESCO recognized Ornek embroidery uses floral motifs that correspond specifically to Crimean flora. So settler colonialism, we had Crimean Hanat existing from 15th century to 18th century until the Russian Empire annexed Crimean Hanat in 1783. And Crimean Tatar toponyms were systematically replaced with the Russian and new Greek names. So renaming was an act of cultural erasure, making it difficult to trace original names in official records. And original names were often removed from maps, administrative documents, and public consciousness. So that's why, for example, as I said, Karasu Bazar was the original name. Now it is called Belogorsk, which is coming from Belaya Skala or Belaya Gory, from White Mountains. This is how they called it because of Akkaya. So the markers were the big guiding and travel guides in Crimea for local people, for tourists, and even for herds. So Nishen Naiman used to be called Nishen Naiman. Now it is Sovetskaya. And I would like to draw your attention how the names were given so close. Sovetskaya and Sovetski is another smaller village, Ichki. And then they gave to Jurchi a name Pervomarskaya. So I've explained this to you. Karasu Bazar as river Büyük Karasu, the black water as Karasu Bazar stands on it. Akhmezjet is the capital of Crimea, which is now called Simferopol. Why is it called, why Crimean Tatars called it Akhmezjet? Because there was an old white mosque in downtown city. And then they decided to call it a white mosque, which is literally means Akhmezjet. So Balaclava is also, as you've known, is perspective as Russia now uses it is naval port, or have been using it during Second World War. So it's a unique balak, which is fish catching place, due to its sheltered harbor, ideal for fishing. You can see the Crimean Tatar toponymic map with the Russian, obviously, translations. The map or toponymy has been working on by many scholars in Crimea. And I think this map specifically was developed in early 2000s. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nara, for this inspiring presentation. And now we are moving further to our next speaker, Martin-Oleksandr Kisly. Martin is the head of Crimean Studies Center at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy in Kyiv, in Ukraine. Martin is originally from Simferopol, Crimea. He is a historian specializing in the history of Crimean and Crimean Tatars, with a particular focus on the Soviet and post-Soviet periods. In 2021, he defended his dissertation entitled The Return of the Crimean Tatars to Their Homeland, 1956-1989. His research interests include oral history, memory, trauma studies, identity, migration, and colonialism. So, Martin, the floor is yours now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Such a pleasure to be with you today, and such a pleasure to see so many familiar faces among attendees. And thank you, Silas, for hosting the event. Thank you, Oleksii, for the invitation, and thanks to your impressive talent for persuasion, because it wasn't an easy decision for me to be with you today. I will elaborate on it more later. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, and sorry for the AI. There are almost no pictures or photos on the topic of my today's talk. So let's enjoy them and I instead. This morning I was pruning the trees in my garden, and I imagine probably many of you are familiar with the process beyond simply removing dead or diseased wood. There are certain rules one must follow to keep care of your garden. First, you cut back the long branches, reaching straight up forward. Then you clear out the branches growing toward the center of the crown. And this is how we shape a fruit tree to fit our specific idea of aesthetics, of course, and productivity. And the question of how do we imagine a garden, or more precisely, how was this imagination constructed, is one I have asked myself many times, and always my thoughts turn back to Crimea when I'm thinking about it. And the reason is that the officials and travelers who arrived in Crimea after its occupation by the Russian Empire in the 18th century, they were struck by what they saw. Because to their eyes, the gardens of Crimean Tatars appeared to be wild and uncivilized. They were baffled by how the local population, despite possessing such fertile land, could manage it in what they deemed a barbaric manner. For instance, Peter Palas, he was a Prussian naturalist who was invited to the Russian Empire by Catherine. He wrote in his travel notes that the local Crimean Tatar population is useless, inactive, and even dangerous. And pretty similarly, in the same very manner, Potemkin argued in his letters to Catherine that Crimean Tatars are lazy, and that their gardens showed no visible traces of human intervention to him. To illustrate this, let's look at a specific example of an indigenous Crimean horticulture. Traditionally, Crimean Tatars didn't prune the branches of their trees. Instead, they supported them with very long wooden sticks known as chattels. This method allowed for incredibly high yields from a single tree. While this might seem unusual to those of us who are trained in different garden traditions, you can imagine how it was perceived by the white colonizers of the time. It looked absolutely wild and primitive, of course. But today I want to focus on something else, the chairs. Chair is not a garden in the sense we usually understand. And I should clarify it from the very beginning that I'm not an expert in this subject. And reference to chairs appears only sporadically in a few available sources that I was working with. However, I also carry some memories of these wild gardens from my own childhood. It's the only photo of Chayir that I was able to find in a personal archive. You can see that you can easily see the fruit trees because they are blossoming. My own first encounter with the Chayir happened a long time ago, early in my childhood, during a mountain hike with my father. You probably know those white apples and wild pear trees that you may occasionally find in the forest while walking. Usually the trees are scattered randomly and the fruit is small, it's hard, it's lacking flavor. But then we suddenly stepped into a clearing field with fruit trees, and fruits were almost indistinguishably from the varieties I was used to. I mean, from the marketplace, both in size and appearance. And in fact, they probably tasted even better. And no, this wasn't just my own childhood imagination playing tricks on me. So what exactly is a chayir? In a literal translation from Crimean Tatar, the word means mountain meadow or hayfield. However, in practice, it refers specifically to a mountain garden. And due to lack of formal research and primary sources and my own expertise, I'm not a linguist, unfortunately, I have to develop my own hypothesis, and I believe that chayir were originally used strictly as hayfields in forest clearings, and only later they evolved into the complex garden system. To define it more formally, a chayir is a traditional type of horticulture practiced in the mountains and foothills of Crimea, functioning as a self-sustaining ecosystem. It is a system rooted in ancient traditions that combine multiple functions. This simultaneously an orchard, a hayfield, a pasture, and a source of timber. It exists in deeply harmony with nature, carefully accounting for local microrequirements and, of course, topography. Furthermore, these were communal spaces used and maintained by entire village across generations, sometimes for centuries. In Crimea, chairs evolved into polycultural plant communities designed for multifunctional public use. One of the primary techniques of this type of gardening, besides the use of microclimate, is the grafting of cultivated fruit varieties onto wild trees. From the perspective of modern industrial agriculture that we're used to, Chayir might look like an abandoned garden with trees scattered across the forest, across the slopes of the mountain. In reality, however, Chayir is a unique example of ecological interaction, pretty harmonious one. Chairs, they were typically established in mountain ravines and forest glades or near water sources. The process was a blend of careful selection and traditional craftsmanship. Wild fruit trees that already produced large and tasty fruits, they were preserved as they were, and those with smaller, more bitter fruit, they were used as rootstock. Crimean Tatars practice grafting, specifically under the bark, or there's just the cleft grafting. And to seal the graft, they use a traditional mixture of clay. Establishing Chair was in many ways a ritual. As shepherds drove their flocks up to Yaiwa, the high mountain pastures like Polonina in Ukraine, they would carry small branches of cultivated trees with them. And along the way, they would graft these onto wild trees they encountered on their way. A wide variety of species were integrated into these gardens: apricots, plums, apples, pears, cherries, quinces, hazelnuts, walnuts. And for the rootstock, they choose hardy wild pears, apples, or cherries. But the cherry wasn't just about fruit. Non-fruiting trees, they were used to shade fruiting trees like the chinara or horse chestnut. They were an essential component of this complex because their massive spreading canopies helped maintain an ideal balance of heat and moisture. And they acted as a windbreaks, provided much needed shade, prevented soil erosion, and shielded the smaller fruit trees and shrubs from the sun. The choice of location depended heavily on light and water. It's important to know that Shire varied greatly. They may be different, they were different. Some were simply forest clearings deep in the mountains. I visited perhaps just once a year just to harvest the fruits. Others located closer to villages required significantly more labor and infrastructure. In the initial stage of setting up a Chair near settlement, a mountain stream would be diverted or obstructed by rows of wood or stones, and these were designed to trap fertile seed, which over time formed natural terrace along the slope. For irrigation, they built special dams called Arabadzhy on the rivers, feeding into complex network of canals known as ariks. And these dams featured gates that could be opened directly to provide water directly to every single tree. Water was also channeled from mountain springs known as chakraks, which were maintained and kept clear of leaves and other debris. We know some of the secrets of Chair gardening thanks to the work of dedicated researchers and enthusiasts. For instance, while planting a walnut tree, they would dig a shallow hole and place a flat stone at the bottom. And the stone prevented the tree roots from diving into the too deep into the dry mountain soil. Instead, the root system was forced to grow laterally, spreading long grooves through the fertile upper layer of soil. They would also toss a few handfuls of wheat or barley onto the stone, and the grain would sprout, but unable to reach the surface and would just decompose and provide natural fertilizer for the young tree. Another technique involved planting two saplings tied together so their roots would fuse during the first few years, and later the weaker trunk was cut away, leaving the remaining tree with a double root system capable of withstanding severe droughts. The most favorable conditions were found on slopes up to 700 meters above the sea level. At this altitude, the gardens bloomed about 2 or 3 weeks later than those in the valleys, protecting the blossom from the late spring cold weather from the frost. Over time, the spaces became what we now call natural plant system, resilient plant communities capable of self-regulation and natural pest resistance. And these small gardens were connected to the surrounding forest landscape by a thousand invisible threads, allowing natural process to flourish with minimal human intervention. The chairs, they were multifunctional, as I said previously. They were places to graze livestock, move hay, and gather firewood. They provided the harvest for big mess, dried fruits, jams, compote, and different other things. If Chair was situated close to a village, you would often find even beehives lining its perimeter. The chairs were the physical embodiment of a profound understanding of nature, a way of coexisting with the landscape and preserving it while also drawing sustenance from it. At the beginning of this talk, I briefly touched on the question of ownership and to clarify, first of all, property rights shifted significantly across different historical periods. And secondly, much like the maintenance practice I described, the form of ownership often depended on how far the chair was located from the village. So most chairs, they emerged near small rural communities, and these were typically unfenced, and their resources were shared by all members of the community. However, during the period of the Crimean Khanate, larger private chairs began to appear, and these were sometimes partially or fully fenced, primarily to protect the trees from livestock, by example. Historical records such as 17th century land registers of southern Crimea list chairs as peasant communal land, but in some cases we see evidence of household use, where a specific garden was tied to a single family, and in some legal acts from that era, we even find documented cases of chairs being bought or sold. Everything in these gardens happens of its own accord. The mountain stream brings exactly as much water as it needed. The dry branches provide enough fuel, and the grass feeds the livestock. We have to chance these gardens contain trees planted since ancient times for the Tatars' delight. Only in the shade they cast, enjoying the abundance of fruit and the expected profit. This was the first impression of Crimea and Shairs written by Russian judge Pyotr Sumarokov, who visited Crimea in the 1799. Sumarokov went so far as he called the Tatars these pampered children of nature. And as I mentioned at the beginning, these colonial descriptions were built on a system of different categories like wildness and barbarism, because indigenous traditions were frequently labeled as disordered, undisciplined, and uncivilized. You pretty know for sure that, for example, French colonists in North America used the term savage, wild, to describe both the flora and the people, implying that they both required cultivation and domestication. And of course, the lazy native trope, because the lack of interest in accumulating capital in the European sense was dismissed as natural laziness or the chains of idleness. This is often used to justify forced labor, with colonizers claiming that local people would sooner starve to death than work. But beyond this insulting description, the arrival of the Russian Empire in Crimea created devastating practical problems for the local population. After 1783, many pieces of fertile land were seized from them, and the local population was suddenly banned from using the gifts of the forest, and they were forced to pay for using chairs, for water pastures, and even for gathering firewood or hay. Um, the new imperial land order asserted that land not cultivated or fenced according to European standards was empty or vacant, and this allowed colonizers to claim they are not seizing land, but simply settling wilderness that God had intended for a more productive people. Naturally, the chairs located deeply in the mountains remained largely unknown to the colonizers, and this leads me to the hypothesis that the colonization of Crimea actually led to an increase in purely wild chairs in remote areas as people retreated further into the landscape. However, this is a point that requires further specialized research. Ironically, With the arrival of the empire, the word Chair took a completely different meaning. In this photograph, you can see Fevzi Musaniev and his wife Ediye. In 1938, Fevzi was executed and his wife was sent to the camps as a wife of an enemy of people. And their daughter Gulnar, she captured this photo in next way. Father and mother taking a photo while on vacation in Chair Park in Mishor, 1933. What is Chair Park? Some of you, I hope not, but some of you might have heard the famous Soviet song in Chair Park, The Roses Are Blooming. In the 19th century, Russian architects in Crimea, they began incorporating elements of indigenous agro-technical tradition into landscape design, and this gave birth to Chair Park, which nowadays look like this. The park itself centered around the Chair dacha, which belonged to Grand Duke of Russia until 1917. But there are other forms of appropriation as well. In several German colonies in the Crimean foothills and eastern Crimea, gardening flourished, and the settlers, they grew commercial fruits, not only the colony orchard, but also in forest shires, having borrowed this entire management system from the local Tatars, Crimean Tatars. They even took mulberry cutting from the locals to supply the silk weaving manufacturers. Interestingly, after the revolution, the new Soviet government also took notice of these gardens, and a publication titled Socialist Reconstruction of the Southern Coast of Crimea noted that the cultivation of fruit trees in Chairs deserves attention because it is something that has been neglected until recently. However, the reality was different, and the introduction of industrial gardening techniques in Soviet Crimea led to the rapid decline of traditional Chairs. And of course, it is worth noting that during the Soviet collectivization, these hidden Chairs, they became a literal lifesaver for many peasants. This is a fragment from a work, literary work by Ibrahim Pasha, in which he's describing the period of the exile, the deportation of Crimean Tatar people. Here we see Chairs mentioned alongside the sea and the mountains, and as a kind of a fundamental element of homeland. And indeed, in these memoirs of those deported, Chairs are kind of an inseparable part of the image of Crimea as it existed before 1944. The deportation effectively destroyed Chairs. Those located near villages, they were cut down for firewood, but the new settlers, those on the mountains, they were abandoned and turned completely wild. Despite the fact that this type of gardening requires minimal maintenance, the Chairs decayed and nearly vanished from the mountain slope and plateaus of Crimean Mountain after 1944. And in the narratives of those deported, one often finds that the sentiment that after May 18, it wasn't just the place names that changed. The very nature of Crimea was altered. Nature itself, usually in these narratives, specifically the flora, is often described in metaphorical terms as the soul of Crimea, and the deported Crimean Tatars are depicted as being uprooted, while the process of returning is described as a gradual rerouting. And talking about rerouting, talking about the return and revival that began after the Crimean Tatars returned to their homeland, it touched upon many aspects of life, and the Chairs were no exception. Petro Volvich, a prominent Ukrainian scientist and pomologist, he conducted an inventory of the remaining cherry plantations and began an expeditionary study of them. An initiative group was formed to track down these ancient gardens across Crimea, collecting seeds and replanting them. And given the general atmosphere of people returning to their land, these efforts were seen as a mission of salvation for the fruit varieties of their ancestors. I know I'm already running out of time, but when discussing Crimea today, even a topic like chairs cannot ignore the 2014 occupation. Just a brief remark on this. Before 2014, a gardener named Dmitry Sokolov, he attempted to restore a chair, and the head of the local forestry department granted him a permission and in a piece of forest to do it. And however, when the Russian occupation authorities arrived, Dmitry was treated as a criminal, and he was prosecuted and convicted for illegal lodging. There are many global parallels that can be drawn while we are talking about indigenous traditions of taking care of land. And while chairs are pretty unique, we can find a similar practices in Caucasus and in practices of indigenous people of North America or Asia. Nevertheless, I need to tame myself and stop talking. And just a conclusion, I will say that chairs are far more than just a historical method of gardening. They are a profound testament of a philosophy of living in deep harmony with the landscape, and by reframing these wild spaces through the colonial lens, we see not just disorder, but a sophisticated, multifunctional ecosystem that sustained both the land and its people for centuries. And while the trauma of 1944 deportation and the current occupation have threatened this heritage, the spirit of the Chair persists in the ongoing efforts to, let me say, reclaim and refute these ancient traditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for this extremely insightful presentation. It was a pleasure to listen to you. And with our next talk, we are moving from Crimea to my native Azov Sea shores, which is a extra pleasure for me. Our last but not least speaker is Svitlana Arabadzhy. Svitlana holds a PhD in history, and currently she's working as a researcher at the Department of Archaeology, Conservation and History at the University of Oslo in Norway. She also works as associate professor in the Department of History and Archaeology at Mariupol State University. Svitlana's research focuses on the history of Greek minority in Ukraine and on maritime economic and social history, with particular attention to Azov and Black Sea region. Her current research project, entitled Heritage of Eastern and Southern Ukraine, Preservation of 19th and early 20th century newspapers. This project is founded by Endangered Archives Program of the British Library. So, Svitlana, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you for having me today. Thank you for introduction, and thank you to organizer to organize this event. Could you see my screen, the whole screen?
Yes, we can see it now.
Thank you. So today, as Oleksii already told, I'm going to talk about one of the largest minority in the Donetsk region of Ukraine, the Greeks, often referred to as Mariupol Greeks or Greeks of the Azov Sea region. And today I will focus on their environmental knowledge and the shaping of a semi-pastoral economy. And before I begin exploring the economic life of Greek settlers in the Azov steppe, let me briefly explain how and why Greeks appeared in this region. So, in fact, Greeks, or as they were often referred to the official documents, Christian of the Greek faith, meaning Orthodox Christians, they had lived in Crimea for centuries. And the Roman Empire decided to resettle around 30,000 Christians from the Crimean Khanate, officially presenting this action as an effort to protect Orthodox population from Muslim rule. So in practice, however, the relocation was enforced through pressure and intimidation, even though the authorities promised various privileges and material benefits to settlers. So by 1778, so before the occupation of the Crimea, the Romanov Empire had completed the removal of the Christian population from the Crimean Khanate. And one of the key demands made by the Christian population was the right to live in a close-knit community, separate from other ethnic groups. And when the Greeks arrived in what is now the Dnipro region of the Ukraine and discovered that the territory designated to them was already inhabited by Ukrainians, they refused to settle there. And the Greeks, among other concerns, was also concerned about the lack of open steppe land in this quite densely populated area. And the steppes were essential for grazing the flock of sheep, as sheep farming at that time had been one of the primary occupation of the Greeks in Crimea. So as a result, they were decided to resettle the Greeks in the region in modern-day Mariupol, which had previously home for a small Ukrainian population. So ultimately, after the nearly of just imagine 2 years of resettlement, approximately 18,000 Greeks were transferred to the Azov Sea region. So the Greeks were granted a large amount of land and were allowed to practice any kind of husbandry, to open craft and factories. And probably, as you know, the Azov region was an excellent place for sheep farming because it has the most fertile soil, and this land were rich in wild herbs. That is why for more than 2,000 years, the region was home to nomadic tribes. So by transplanting their economic practices and cultural tradition to the Azov steppe, the Greeks accounted a range of new environmental and climatic conditions. The environment proved harsher than that it was in Crimea, with colder winter, with stronger winds. At the same time, the uncultivated yet fertile lands, interspersed with gentle hills, provided quite favorable conditions for animal husbandry. So, and the success of Greeks in sheep breeding was also due to their particular breed of sheep known in the steppe of the Black and Azov Sea region as chunduk, or the fat-tailed sheep. So the fat-tailed sheep were also known under the name Kalmyk, Kyrgyz, and Greek. So this sheep was distinguished by their large size and bifurcated tail, called the kurduk, in which fat accumulated. This fat reserve allowed the sheep to survive on meager winter forage, and the high mobility and endurance of this breed of chunduk enable Greek herders, when necessary, to travel quite long distance with their flocks. So this breed was well adapted to geographical features and environmental condition of the Azov steppe. At the same time, this breed also required skillful herding and careful management under the challenging circumstances of the steppe landscape. So the vast steppe expanses and the large number of sheep shaped the very nature of sheep husbandry in the region. So to organize livestock management, Greeks established sheep farms. It's not the same sheep farms that we could see now in the picture. So these sheep farms were lacked of physical premises or enclosed facilities. And by 1794, just 14 years after their resettlement, there were 35 sheep farms in the Greek settlements, collectively managing more than 81,000 sheep. And this amounted to roughly 7 sheep per village inhabitants. As you can see, in 6 years, it's already were 13 sheep per inhabitants. And of course, if you have so many sheep, you need to herd somehow them. So for the herding of livestock, villages hired experienced shepherds from among the Greeks. The local name was Chaban or Udaman, so there was some hierarchy between them, who were skilled professionals in the care and management of sheep. So sheep were kept in flock, and a shepherd grazed the flock in the steppe almost the whole year round, ensuring the rational use of pasture. It was very important, the rational use, because when you have more and more every year sheep, you need to take care about the steppe. So herd movement was deliberately slow whenever possible, promoting better grazing efficiency and more effective fat deposition to the kurduk. So the Chabans also ensured that the sun didn't blind the animals, that they didn't trample more grass than they consume, and that the herd moved didn't coincide with the wind direction, which could raise clouds of dust from heavily trodden paths. So in the Azov region, seasonal grazing routes were established to prevent the degradation of grassland and also to avoid conflicts among shepherds. And sheep grazing followed as organized system that allowed the Greeks to remain the harmony with the environment while using the steppe ecosystem efficiency. So the Chabans were responsible for guarding the flock, protecting them from wolves, oversee lambing, administrating treatment when it was necessary, slaughtering incurable animals to prevent the spread of the disease. In the understanding of the Greek community, Chaban were bearers of collective knowledge and expertise regarding the care of sheep, the local geography, meteorology, traditional medicine, veterinary practices, and pharmacology. So people who really knows a lot about what happened in the environment and around them. So Greek expertise in sheep husbandry was not only adapted to the new natural condition of the steppe, but also transmitted across generation. So the pastoral orientation of the Greek economy shaped also social relationship within the village and established a conditional hierarchy among its inhabitants. So the Chaban were held esteem, and this understanding of sheep breeding as central to both the economic and social life of the Greek population, as well as their respect for the labor and professionalism of the Chabans, was captured in a local proverb, so one cannot be a master without first being a Chaban. So there are a lot of other stories about how it was important, at least when in young age, to try to be a Chaban, to be it's a student in one of the Chabans. So sheep husbandry constituted an integral part of Greek life, and its significance ranging from economic activity to dietary practices and material culture can be traced from the very first year of their forced resettlement to the Azov region. So this mode of semi-pastoral economy was fully adapted to the steppe environment and remained deeply intertwined with the spiritual and cultural fabric of Greek society. So just some numbers. By 1800, in the Greek villages, the ratio of sheep to cattle was approximately 9:1. So the remarkable higher number of sheep, as well as their predominance over the livestock, indicate that for Greeks, sheep function as a key marker of prosperity, abundance, and domestic well-being. So sheep provided meat, which occupied a central part of their dietary system. So I'm sure, I think that a lot of you tried surpa or traditional also Crimean Tatars meal, and haurma, for example, the roast lamb with fat coating, which was used to preserve meat throughout the winter. One of the beloved meal was churchira or chebureki. So the fat was used also to for baking. So all parts of the sheep was used by Greeks. And sheep provide Greeks not only with meat, but also with milk, and which formed a basis for the rich variety of dairy products. So kaimak, aryan, it's a typical milk drinks that Greeks had this time. And even, for example, for production salted sheep cheese, the Greeks use a rennet enzyme called glaganka, so obtained from the stomach extract of a young lamb. And the cheese was also stored in processed sheepskin bags known as tulum. So this method, for example, of cheese making and storage was characterized of nomadic peoples whose economies were based primarily on sheep keeping, reflecting like a broader pastoral tradition adapted to steppe environments. Of course, wool provided the Greeks not only the warm clothes, but also essential materials for creating domestic comfort and sense of coziness within their household. So spinning wool was traditionally the responsibility of women in every Greek household, and it was considered part of their domestic duties. Sheepskin were used to make outer garments such as coat, vest, and more rarely footwear. And it was some distinctive features of Greek sheepskin coat, kožuchs or sleeveless vest, and trousers that they were sewn and worn with the wool torn inward. So, and also mostly all soft furnishing in Greece household were made from wool. So residents slept in a specifically prepared mattresses that was stuffed with wool and were covered with gilded woolen blankets. Narrow wool-filled cushions were placed along benches, leaning the walls. So all these things, they provided warmth, comfort, and coziness in the Greek homes. And products derived from the slaughter of sheep were also employed in domestic life, including the manufacture of toys for children. So a common game called Ladushki Kremushki, and it depends on the village, was played using the hog bones of sheep. So games incorporated animals' bones also were characterized for societies whose economies was primarily based on sheep husbandry. And one very important, beyond the recreational use, the most significant practical application of sheep manure was as a fuel source for heating homes. So as you know, Azov steppes are treeless, so it was very important source for heating, and Greeks used it until the beginning of 20th century. And of course, sheep was at the same time very important living commodities, which enable Greeks to sell them and to buy a thing that they needed. Sheep husbandry formed the backbones of the Greek economy following their resettlement from Crimea to the Azov region, and constituted the foundation of their material well-being. And even in folklore, we can find examples, a lot of examples where shepherds, for example, represented as a person with special honesty, integrity, diligence. So there are fairy tales, there are other short songs, a lot of things that show us how important was the role of chabans and also the sheep in Greek society. And maritime trade expansion enabled by Ecocide, the Black Sea port, significantly shaped the Greek population economy and encouraged export-orientated colonization. So to meet international demand, the Romanov Empire prompt steps enterprises on breeding fine wool merino sheep and push Greek community to adapt their flock. And this policy ignored local environmental knowledge and reflect a broader pattern of colonial governments. However, the Greeks were reluctant to change their traditional breeds, and from their perspective, it was irrational, economically, ecologically. So the maintenance of tailed sheep demanded neither extensive effort nor time from the owner, as herding was carried out by the hired shepherd. So in contrast, merino wool or fine wool sheep required the construction of shelters to protect them from the adverse weather, to the provision of high quality feed, special care, etc., etc. So Greeks know that they didn't have this knowledge, and they knew what is better for them in this case. And just finishing, I think my time has passed. So in documents, we can observe that the Greek they didn't start to raise the merino sheep. In documents, we have this proof, and officials were unable to understand the Greek reluctance to change their sheep breeds, interpreting as both as unwillingness to adopt new practices and quite strong adherence to traditional ways of life. However, the history shows that the Greeks' decision not to change the composition of their flock was rationally grounded on their knowledge. Once international demand for wool declined and the Romanov Empire eased its pressure, merino sheep breeding quickly fell into decline. So, and Greeks continue to raise the Chunduk breed mostly for 2022 now. It's difficult for me to say what kind of sheep they raise. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Svitlana, for this great presentation, and thank you for all three participants for sharing insights from your research. Thanks a lot to our audience attending this seminar today, and of course to Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies for providing infrastructure for this video conferencing. Thank you all, and have a nice day or evening, depending on where you are.